Okay, hey everyone. Thanks for coming into this slightly warmer room than other places in this building. I'm Diana, or known as Broccolini to most people on the internet. I've told this story a million times, so you come and find me if you do want to know why Broccolini is my nickname. And feel free to call me either, I answer to both. So today I'm going to talk about design engineering and why I think it's having a bit of a moment, and how AI is both influencing this and other things and the future, what the future of product design might hold. Also, I'm going to probably interchange product design and software design throughout this whole thing, so sorry in advance, and if you want to get pedantic about the differences, happy to chat to you about that later as well. Okay, so I am currently head of design at GitHub. I lead all the design teams at GitHub, basically, which includes our product design team that work on things like Copilot and Actions and pull requests, our brand and marketing team that work on some of the really delightful artwork on our marketing pages, as well as things like our conferences like Universe, and create our beautiful swag and Octocat illustrations. Our customer research team, who really try to understand what our customer real needs are, because sometimes we have to be reminded that although at GitHub we use GitHub to build and design GitHub, sometimes we're not always representing our customers so well. And this team also includes our design infrastructure team, which is where we work on design systems, accessibility, our core user experiences, things like navigation, which is the team that I actually led for quite a while before moving into the head of design role. But I wanted to start with, well, where I started, I guess. My first real job was actually in a graphic design and print studio in the UK. And I hadn't really realized that graphic design and web design was a job that I could have when I was at school. I had enjoyed creative pursuits since I was young, but my mother cleverly told me, you can't do art as a job, so maybe find something else. But I feel like I hopefully ended up proving her a little bit wrong. I started to get interested in computers as a teenager, mostly through friends that would host LAN parties, for those of you that are old enough to have participated in those. I used to play StarCraft and Quake with some clans, and that got me, because I wanted my computer to work well and we had to network everything up, that started getting me more interested in computers and IT and the world of the web. So I kind of found myself at this print studio, and I found that there was some work there that was a combination of that technical and creative world. While I was there, my boss told me that they were in between purchase order systems, and I was like, and they didn't want to pay for the new software yet because to extend the old software, because it was going to cost a bunch of money and they'd be locked into like another year contract. And I was like, don't worry, I got this. I know how to make Microsoft Access databases. And I also knew that no one else knew how to really actually use Access. And so I found myself making a nice user-friendly interface with big form fields and buttons, and using VBA, which I recently learned, according to most of the speakers here, makes you really, really cool if you've ever used VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. And that turned out to be the first user interface that I designed and coded. And there was a little spark that kind of went off, and I was like, there's something that I really like about this combination. And while I was working at this print center, the print industry was starting to get a bit worried about the web, and that no one was going to want anything printed anymore. Lots of businesses even shut down. And so our company started to get more invested in web design. I learned how to use things like Front Page and Dreamweaver, and my mentor showed me how to update the company website. And that's when I started to know what I really wanted to do, that I could have this perfect marrying of creative and technical in this role as a web designer. and that sort of set my career path. A few years later, I ended up going backpacking to Australia. This is a photo of me next to a sign where a place called Kojonup, which proudly was the first shire to have more than 1 million sheep. And there were more sheep than people there, but it was a great experience to explore non-city parts of Australia. And while I was working there, I was backpacking around for a bit, and then I started to run out of money. And so I headed to Sydney to get like a real job and pick up my savings. And I managed to land myself a job in a government organization that were really excited that I knew graphic design and web design and was a bit creative and technical, and offered me a job and a visa. So while I was in Sydney, I started to meet more people working on the web through meetups and conferences. I made some friends with people that hosted this co-working thing called Jelly, and I have no idea why it was called Jelly. If you know, let me know. But this is a photo from a co-working session, at a Jelly co-working session at someone's house. And yeah, so through this community, I met more people that sort of seemed to blur the lines between creative and technical. For example, one of the people that I met there was Cameron Adams, who is now the Chief Product Officer at Canva, if you've heard of that company, and where he's leading product and design. When I met him, I contracted him and his agency to design a cultural awards website, and I saw how great he was as a designer and also how technical he was. He seemed to be really good at JavaScript and stuff as well. He also authored a book called The Art and Science of CSS, which is one of the few technical books that I really enjoyed reading, like back to front. And so I was a little bit in awe of him, I would say, and he really inspired me and made me feel like I wanted to be better at both design and code. So I'd been working in government for the first 5 years in Australia, working on the web, graphic design, doing a lot of work on accessibility. And then I left government to work at a small boutique design agency. I wanted to try something different. And that's where my journey with GitHub began. So in July 2010, a handful of people at this agency had decided to participate in a hackathon competition. We began jamming on ideas, and the engineers turned to me and said, "Hey, why don't you sign up for GitHub? This is like where we're collaborating on code." They knew I knew like enough to be dangerous with some HTML and CSS, and I was like, "Sure, why not?" And this is actually the room where I signed up for GitHub and started to learn Git in 2010. And something about that felt like really exciting and a little bit powerful. I was like, oh, I can be where the engineers are. I can look cool like other people I'd seen in conferences with a black terminal screen on my laptop. But it also led me to wanting to keep up that interest and learning more about Git and GitHub. And I discovered Jekyll and moved my probably terribly coded WordPress site over to Jekyll. And something about that felt better. It gave me an excuse to keep using Git and GitHub. And it also, something felt better about Jekyll too. I sort of felt like I started to learn some of the basics of web architecture and how you could construct a page and have partials and loops, and I've forgotten what they were technically called in Jekyll, but it just felt like closer to the metal in a way. So my interest in tech kept growing. I watched the movie The Social Network, and I was like, I thought it was cool at the time, and I wanted to be in a place where things were moving faster, and ended up joining a hackathon competition on a bus that went from San Francisco to South by Southwest. I don't recommend doing a hackathon on a bus, especially if you're the designer and you're trying to do like illustration. It is doesn't lend itself to that type of work. And so when I got on the bus, you had to sort of pitch ideas, and then people would like talk to you, and you'd like self-organize into teams. And because I was a designer that knew Git and GitHub and a bit of front end, that seemed attractive to a particular team, and they were really excited to have a designer that knew a little bit about code and could use Git and GitHub to collaborate with them. And so I got on that team, and the team did really well. We got into the finals. We didn't win, but we got a lot of attention. We were in CNET and stuff like that. It felt very exciting to me at the time. And the company that was sponsoring the company that was sponsoring the competition were looking for a designer. And because we'd gotten a lot of attention, they knew about me, they knew about the team, and that led me to getting a job and a role in the States, and I moved out 3 months later. And so while I wouldn't say, learning Git and GitHub completely enabled that opportunity, it definitely opened a door that might otherwise not have. And so again, having a little bit of technical skill while being a designer served me well. So although having some creative and technical skills had sort of, worked out for me so far, I also found that there were lots of places that kind of saw those as somewhat separate. And so I even found myself working in a company where when I had code up on my screen, the CEO would get mad and be like, "Why are you wasting your time with code up on your screen?" And I couldn't understand it. I was like, "But it's faster for me to make these changes than send stuff, put some images in Dropbox or something, or write up the colors I want this thing to be, and explain it to the engineer when I can commit this myself." But we do often see that design over time has become its own distinct specialization and profession. And we often see that reflected in org charts where engineering and design are under separate leadership. So why are we seeing design engineering surfacing as its own discipline? It literally has design and engineering in the title. So why might we want this role in our org chart? And what does it have to do with the future of design in the age of AI? So since I'm a proper boss person now, and I don't get to design and code as much as I do spend time in spreadsheets and horribly designed HR software, I thought I would talk to other people on my team that were a bit closer to this discipline. So I talked to design engineers, software engineers, some of our very technical designers, and some of our design directors as well to sort of get the leadership perspective. So I conducted these 11 interviews, and this was across different areas as well, like brand, design systems, and product design. So the first question I asked, of course, is how would you describe the role of a design engineer? So most people felt that there was a very distinct difference between having that professional role and that title, design engineer, versus being someone that was perhaps a very technical product designer and taking on tasks that could be seen as design engineering. The main thing that people talked to is that design engineers can design and code. They can do both. So they might start a project in Figma or prototyping in code. But with the title engineer, there also is this expectation that they deliver production code too. Even if they might need to work with some other software engineers to work across the full stack to deliver a complete experience, they were required and expected to work in production. The other thing that came up is that even though that you might feel that, at least by the end of this talk, that design engineering might be a kind of a niche area, it still has a spectrum. There are different. There might be the same skills required across different areas, but depending on the type of work you do, that could look very different depending on the team. So for example, our brand and marketing design engineers, they are most often working on these beautiful animated stunning, I think, websites like our Universe website and our Copilot features page. So this often includes quite creative work, making delightful interactions, but it also means really focusing on performance. And that could mean spending a lot of time in the Networks tab to ensure that marketing pages don't just look good, but they also load fast and they feel good as well. A lot of design engineers really like tools that let them get close to design and code and see that kind of together. Most folks reference really liking things like Storybook. This is an example of using Storybook to play around with our variable fonts at GitHub. Speaking of that, speaking of Mona Sans, we have design engineers on the brand and marketing team were also more likely to work on these creative projects, and they worked on building our Hubot Sans and Mona Sans variable fonts, which, by the way, you can also download for yourself if you want to check them out. And then there's design engineers that might work on design systems. They're most likely to be focused on system foundations like design tokens or how we scale patterns across the product, or component API design. It's probably moving too fast for you to really capture all of this, but this is from an engineer walking me through the component API design of something for their marketing page. They're as comfortable in Figma as they are in code. And they sometimes use Figma as a tool for thought and a place to get to work with the designers really closely and other engineers. And then we have design engineers that work on our product features, like Copilot and Copilot Workspace. They may do anything from designing the experience and creating high-fidelity prototypes in code to being part of the team that implements the front end and gets that experience feeling really intuitive and great and polished. And then pretty much everyone said that the main benefit they see of being a designer that also codes, being a true design engineer, is that they can make decisions from design to implementation. There's a faster feedback loop. They can make decisions in code faster and get to a result that feels really, really good because there's less back and forth with other people on the team. So some of you may still be wondering, how is this different from front-end engineering? So that was something that I talked to the team about too, and I think the main thing that came across is that front-end engineers are not responsible for creating the design. Also, many people felt that the front-end engineering role was getting really, really broad, and that people could know what most people referred to as front-of-the-front-end skills, and like semantic HTML, CSS architecture. But in many companies, during the interview process, those front-end engineers might be interviewed on their JavaScript skills, but may not even touch CSS, and that might not be part of the interview process at all. So this got me thinking about how did front-end and product design evolve in the industry? Like, what led to the place that we're currently in? And so I asked the people that I talked to about what they thought about how industry trends had perhaps influenced how product design had really changed and how front-end engineering had got really broad. So many folks talk to, at least of my generation, talk to starting out where without thinking they were really separate. You would use the same tool to do both. I remember learning things like Front Page, Dreamweaver, Adobe Go Live, and you didn't really think, oh, I need to now give this to somebody else. You're just like building and designing it, which also got me into a big tangent about, does anyone remember image maps? I know, that made me giggle, but yeah. So yeah, image maps, 9-slice if you wanted to create buttons with rounded corners. It was a fun time. But I think one of the trends that really influenced like the change in expectations for user experiences was, of course, when in 2007 when the iPhone came out and destroyed the BlackBerry, and really it just really changed expectations about not only about having a phone that's basically a mini computer in your pocket, but also on user experience design and also on being able to look at websites on your phone. And that's where I think responsive design also really influenced trends in product design and front-end development. And I just have to show you this because it's probably my favorite GIF of all time showing responsive. And it's not only hilarious to look at, but for those in the know, you can see some of the challenges that are represented to front-end developers with adjusting layout and preserving document flow and stuff. So there's kind of some in-jokes in there. So I love it. But responsive design really made, I know for me and lots of people I work with, you couldn't really get the results, you couldn't really feel the experience in static mockups. And that's where I started to see more designers getting back into code and designing in the browser. There were also a lot of developments in CSS architecture. So hands up if you have, of all of these acronyms, all of these terms on the screen. Okay. Have you heard of one of them? Okay. More than 4. Okay, cool. We got a few nerds in here. I mean, it's been a while. Like I said, I'm a proper boss now. I don't get to code. I had to remind myself of this journey that I think many people went on who were really into front-end architecture and CSS in particular. So, first off, Sass, syntactically awesome style sheets, which some people would debate sometimes. This came out in 2006, first written in Ruby. I feel like it took a bit of time for it to really be like kind of everywhere and mainstream. I do remember by around like 2011, 2012, it was like very, very popular, especially in larger companies trying to manage styles across larger applications. While I was thinking about this, I also remember that there was this thing called less, and I was like, are people still using that? And so I did a little Google on Google Trends, and it seems that people are still really searching a lot for less in China, New Zealand, and Sweden. So I just, if you're one of those people, let me know why. I didn't know people were still using it. A little tangent there. OOCSS stands for Object-Oriented CSS. This was open sourced on GitHub. It was like a methodology by Nicole Sullivan. She also created something called the media object, where she noticed that the same pattern was being reused over many, many parts of, I think she was working at Facebook at the time. And what she did is abstracted that pattern so that it could be reusable across each of those surfaces instead of just on that particular page. And that sort of, I think, started the idea around like CSS components. And it reduced a lot of lines of CSS. SMAX is, block element modifier. This was in, I think it was around 2010 that it actually got open sourced and started to get used more. And so this was like a way of structuring your CSS as well as the class names system or syntax that you used. The only problem with this is that every company ever that I worked at wanted their own slightly different flavor of BEM syntax and would like argue over whether they had stuff in camel case or Pascal case. You know the drill. And then SMAX, which is Scalable Modular Architecture for CSS by someone known on the internet as Snooks. This is just like another way of sort of rearranging your CSS to make it easier, more modular and reusable. Suit CSS, I've forgotten what that even stands for actually, but if you remember, shout it out. And then IT CSS, this is Inverted Triangle CSS, really catchy name. This was a way of organizing your CSS based on specificity. And then the functional CSS, which some people might know is utility CSS or atomic CSS. Lots of people argued on the internet about this. They would ask, how is this different from inline styles? Before, that was really popular in 2015, and then more recently, Tailwind has sort of renewed this sort of approach. In short, though, all of these were approaches to kind of fight against the cascade, to provide organization and scope to CSS, or as close as you could really get to that in principle. And given, and this is not surprising given that CSS was designed to style documents, not really web applications. These techniques would also, these frameworks and approaches would let you leverage the good parts of CSS, like inheritance, and also increase reusability. That was a big part of this. So instead of saying homepage heading, you would have just your styles for your heading, and so that you could reuse that on anything that wasn't the homepage. And then also reducing lines was really important at one point when you had to split your CSS file into 2 or 3 or 4 because it would break in Internet Explorer if it was over something like 495 selectors. So that was a good thing that I think Internet Explorer did for CSS to motivate us to have less lines. And then, of course, things like Bootstrap really influenced, I think, the world of front-end and design. This was open sourced in, I think, 2011. And this led to many companies building their own little bootstraps. And this is when the age of design systems started to come in, and these approaches in CSS architecture, and then later on, JavaScript architecture, sort of really design systems sort of embraced these two worlds. And things like material design came out. I think Salesforce design system, it was called Lightning Design System. I think that's I don't know whether they came up with the name design system, but that was because they used it in their design system. That sort of really is when that became like the word we would start using instead of style guides or component libraries. And GitHub Primer, we've had what started off, I think, as more of a CSS framework, but really has now grown into a full ecosystem. That was open sourced in 2015 and was one of the reasons I was actually excited to join GitHub. And then on the, meanwhile in JavaScript world, we saw other developments. So I think Node.js came out in 2009 and had a big influence on the front-end stack. And that's where you started to hear this sort of term, front of the front end and back of the back end, be used more often. I think Brad Foss didn't come up with that term, but made it popular for his engaging blog posts. I think this is the line that this subtitle on CSS Tricks just really cracks me up. 2 front-end developers are sitting at a bar, they have nothing to talk about. I love this because it just sort of describes in a nutshell how people were feeling about the vastness of front-end. So on one side, Chris Coyier describes an army of developers whose interests, responsibilities, and skill sets are heavily revolved around JavaScript, and then on the other side, an army of developers whose interests, responsibilities, and skill sets are focused on other areas of the front end, like CSS, HTML, design, interaction, patterns, accessibility, etc. Lots of people had feels about this. This is one of the comments on some of Chris Coyer's research. He said, "I'm so sick of being great at CSS, but forced cruel world to into JavaScript." He said, "I'm not a programmer." I really like the rest of his comment though, where he said, "I think we need to move away from the term myself," talking about front-end engineering. We should split into UX engineers and JavaScript engineers. They are different mindsets. Most people are not amazing at both JavaScript and CSS. Let UX engineers work closely with UX design to create great designs, interactions, prototypes, etc., and let JavaScript engineers handle the data parts. So Some of you might have heard of Frank Camero. He's definitely popular with a lot of people on the web and design in the design world. I'm going to read this out because it's a long one, so you don't have to. He said, "Other people's tool chains are absolutely inscrutable from the outside. Even getting started is touchy. Last month, I had to install a package manager to install a package manager. That's when I closed my laptop and slowly backed away from it. We're a long way from the CSS Zen garden where I started." So this really really started, people had a lot of feelings about where front end was going and a lot of opinions, and some people were upset. And so, but what I do think that happened, and the reason why I'm sort of talking about this, is I think as the front end got kind of deeper in a way, it kind of also opened up this space for the folks that were a bit more hybrid designers, technical, to sort of move into. And I think that's part of what has sort of influenced this new job title and this new role emerging as a design engineer. So, what about AI and design engineering? I don't think that they're necessarily influencing each other that directly, but I do see that AI is influencing and growing our need for more design engineers, because we're in another moment where we are at the sort of cutting edge. We don't have a template for how to do this. And we're having to create more newer interactions and figure out what does it feel like to experience AI on the web. And just like when the iPhone came out, that was a moment where expectations changed about user experiences. I feel the same is happening with AI. And we're also, when I'm talking to the folks at GitHub that work on things like Copilot or in the GitHub Next team, they're like, the tool, you have to get really close to the code. You have to really prototype it. It doesn't cut it to just do it in Figma. And there's not much tooling that helps you get quickly going. So you have to pretty much use the same tooling that engineers are. And then you can find yourself creating experiences that don't work in production. If you're using a different model while you're prototyping, AI is non-deterministic, and so you could get very different results. And so sometimes, even when they're prototyping in code, they're finding when they're getting into that end production experience, they still have to make a lot of design decisions. So having designers that understand what a good user experience feels like, as well as very technical and learning how AI works, is becoming really important. We're even hiring design engineers at GitHub to work on things like this, because we're just seeing a need for it. AI is also, making it easier for designers to code as well. And so while on the flip side, why it's sort of necessary to be able to do some code as a designer if you're working on AI, even if you're not, you can get a bit further with AI tooling as a designer that knows a little bit of code. It lowers the barrier to entry, it lowers the floor, but it also can raise the ceiling a little bit. We often talk about this raising the ceiling for engineers, and to work on bigger problems. But I think it also is true for any level, really, because I was talking to one of our design engineers who is like, yeah, I've been doing Ruby for years, and I know a bit of React, but not much. And I was able to learn a ton and get really, really far building full React app and building really complex prototypes because I was using Copilot to help me. So AI is, it sounds like, making it easier for designers to code, but what about for engineers to design? So this got me thinking about what might be human advantages over AI with creativity. I spoke to a couple of the team about this, and this really stuck with me. Adrian, he's one of our design directors at GitHub. He leads the Copilot team, Copilot design team, and he said, we may need to foster new ways. We may need to find new ways to foster creativity or redefine it. With AI, you can generate good enough photos, logos, illustrations, but all those models are retrofitting against the same data. And he said, I wonder if at some point models being trained after output from other models is going to make it so obviously produced by models and not surprising. Because even right now, he can see things that look like they were generated by AI. He referenced an IKEA chair, funnily enough, and saying, it can be good enough for you. It can have good enough form design, practicality, function. But if you compare something like an IKEA chair to a handcrafted chair by a carpenter, it might not feel like it has quite the same value. Like, I think IKEA does a really good job of, we don't expect it to be super expensive, but we expect it to be good, like decent. But if you're looking at something that is handcrafted and tailored to your desires and needs, just like clothing, you're probably going to place more value on that thing. So he wondered if AI is going to, make some things feel cheap, even if doing that on our own would have felt really, really difficult. So I then started to go deeper into AI and creativity, and I wanted to share that this next section, it was inspired by Aveda Patrice Sampson, who works at Google and has worked in AI for a long, long time. She did a fantastic talk at a conference called Config by Figma in 2023. It's called Skynet Not Yet, so I highly recommend it. So this next section is influenced by her talk, but I've put my own personal spin on it and my own examples that really talk to me and talk to the things that I talked about with the people I interviewed. So I've sort of categorized it into this list. I think human advantages over creativity are through dreaming, drawing, that we make mistakes, that we strive for human preservation, that we have lived experiences that change us and change what we do, that we know we sometimes break the rules intentionally or not, and sometimes we have happy accidents. So going to bring up the iPhone again. Sorry, but I am a designer. It's a thing we like to talk about. Steve Jobs had the imagination, had the idea for the iPhone, and obviously a lot of people worked on it, not just him. But he had the imagination. He dared to dream that be possible where others couldn't, and that really changed the expectations on our user experiences and what we think of as a phone. But when I think about the best examples of human imagination, I can't not think of Sagrada Familia, which is pretty much at the top of my list. This might be recency bias, but because I went there about a year ago. But most people that I've spoken to are they are absolutely in awe if they've gotten to visit in person themselves. When you walk inside, I think this is gonna play. Yeah. When you walk inside, I was just in absolute awe. I was almost gobsmacked, honestly. I couldn't believe how modern it felt and how absolutely stunningly beautiful it felt. And it also felt spiritual. It still felt like a holy place of worship. It's just it's almost overwhelming, but in the most delightful way. And what's also interesting about this is not only that someone could create something as stunning as this, he designed it and he died before it was finished. And so it's continued to be built on, and he had a lot of content to help people get this accurate, but because it's been built upon over years and years, we can't help but think that there's been small changes that might not have been quite how Gaudi did it. So another human influence there. And the other thing that I think is amazing about this is that if you went there 10 years ago and then you went there today, you would see newer parts of the building that were added. it's hard to think of AI and having the experience of something evolving over time. We're like, I want a design of a cat pajama set for myself, and it will like instantly give us, a design, even if it's not quite what we want. But in something like this, you get that experience of seeing how it evolves over time, as well as the amazing creativity and the little micro changes that other people that worked on it may have influenced. So, drawing. There is something that happens when you draw. When you sketch an idea on pen or paper or draw what's right in front of you, which for me is often my cats. Drawing releases endorphins. Regardless of whether you think you can draw or not, there's something that it happens when you take an idea to pen and paper. And what I find interesting as well about drawings and humans' advantage over creativity is how people capture different aspects of what they see in different styles with focuses on different elements. When I look at this drawing, I see my cat Leia's slightly smiling face. She looks happy and content to me with her eyes closed, snuggled up next to her cat mum. And that's because I can fill in those details because I see her every day, and you might notice other things or see different things in this picture. And I think one of the ways that this really was summed up for me. I was recently listening to a podcast called Design Matters by Debbie Millman. It's a fantastic podcast. She's been doing it for years. She interviews a lot of creatives. And she interviewed a guy called Oliver Jeffers, who is most known for his children's books illustrations. They're fantastic. You should check it out. And in this interview, he said that he didn't really find his style and really feel like he got good until he learned to follow the hand. And what he meant by that is learn to follow his hand and where it wanted to go instead of trying to imitate others. And where his hand wants to go and like how he wants to draw and his style is going to be uniquely different depending on who you are. Another thing I mentioned is making mistakes. I think this is my favorite example, the implantable pacemaker. So in the late 1950s, Wilson Greatbatch grabbed the wrong type of resistor out of a box while trying to build an oscillator to record the heartbeat sounds of animals. When he turned it on, he noticed that it produced a signal that mimicked the human heartbeat, and as a result, he invented the implantable pacemaker. Breaking the rules. I love this example. Anyone heard of The Real Book? Couple of musicians. This is just absolutely fascinating. Google this, learn about it. It's an amazing story if you're not a jazz musician. So modern jazz musicians had altered a lot of classic standards over the years with like new harmonies and more complex chord changes. I am not a jazz musician. I play some music, so I have to read off the notes on this one a bit. But to capture those new sounds, two students spent hours and hours listening to those recordings and just transcribing what they heard as best they could. It was a huge undertaking for most of these chord changes had never actually been written down. They weren't necessarily thinking about it at the time, but the students were effectively establishing a new set of standardized harmonies for a handful of classic songs. Now, this book became, I believe, a standard in most classrooms and colleges. I confirmed this with my colleague Damo, who put your hand up, who went to the conservatorium in Brisbane and learned, is apparently an amazing trombone player, and he confirmed with me that yes, they gave you the real book, and if we want to confirm that, if someone has a trombone, then we can see if the book actually worked. Anyway, the other thing that's really funny, really interesting about this is that They did this by listening to the music, so no doubt they would have made some decisions that were not exactly what those musicians were playing. So this book that is transcribed from people listening to variations of jazz music, transcribed it into a book that then became really popular and used like all over the world. They've had this influence, and all of those tiny details, those tiny changes that they may have made intentionally or unintentionally, have now influenced the world of jazz music. And then you can't really talk about breaking the rules without mentioning Andy Warhol, who is, he created some controversy because he used photos taken by other people in his art. And some people questioned, is that art? And it really sort of affected the art world. There was also some interesting and challenging copyright issues with that. There's actually even a case that happened recently that they're worried is going to, affect generative AI and influence the definition of creativity. If you look that up, it's about photos that were copyrighted for Andy Warhol to use of the artist formerly known as Prince, but then how they were then reused after that was his family estate lost that case. So it's interesting how this some person breaking the rules, questioned what was art, was, I would say, successful, is now having this potential influence on generative AI. And of course, because we're GitHub, we have our own Andy Warhol, Andy Cat. This is an Octocat version of Marilyn Monroe, the Marilyn Monroe print that Andy Warhol did. And this was done by Jason Costello, a former designer at GitHub, and I'm very excited to have one of the limited edition prints of this in my home. Anyway, so getting close now to trying to sum of this tangent on AI and creativity. The thing that just struck me is the humans in the loop aspect of all of this. And I couldn't talk to this without talking quickly about my late Auntie Sheila. She actually happened to work in IT at the she's a bit older than my mum, and she started when they still had those punch card type computers, and she had a successful career in IT. And then when she retired, she decided to go back to college and study art. She'd had this itch. She felt like she hadn't been really exploring her potential there, and she wanted to see if she could really do it. And she became a successful selling artist. And I just love, again, that she was both creative and technical. And in her art, she would often work with found materials. So she would go for walks and pick up different materials, and she would use them in her art. The first one, I think it's a dandelion, is a monoprint. If you're familiar with that process, a lot of us did it at school. It's really fun. And then the second one is the Honesty 3 Indigo, is what is called a solar print. So these are both like how they are, because she literally found a physical object and used it in her artwork. So humans in the loop there. And then this last one is called the dance rehearsal. My mum actually has this at home. I love this sketch because I look at it and I can just see the person dancing. And why I love this example is because it's not only what my Auntie Sheila captured when she was watching that dancer, but it's also the movements that the dancer made that resulted in this piece of art here. And then finally, can't really talk about this without thinking about the happy accident that is our brand. The Octocat, created by Simon Oxley, I think that we've decided internally this is a cat in an octopus suit, but people do like to argue about this and the number of legs. So this was pulled from a stock illustration site by one of our founders, used on things like our earlier 404 page, and then evolved over time to become this really core part of the brand and something that we all love. There's even been full, what I think are Disney level, animations created with the Octocat, who we actually now call Mona Lisa Octocat, so I'm going to refer to her by a proper name. We've created all sorts of artwork and illustrations, even Monamojis. We have a whole Monamoji set, and some, I don't know what we're using it for, sort of ASCII-ish art there. People have even gotten tattoos of the Octocat. They love it so much. And of course, it's our logo. It's become our logo. And so who knows why they decided to pick that particular artwork, but now it's just a core part of our brand. So another human in the loop, happy accident there. Thanks for sticking it out with me in this very, very hot room. We're almost there. So what's AI's role in the future of design? Most people that I talk to, and certainly what I think is that there are many traits that will remain the same for designers. There's many skills that we still need. We need to take our understanding of user research and human psychology. We need to walk through experiences and create something that meets the customer and business needs. So there's many skills that we will still need regardless of what we're working on, but we'll be working with a different medium. And I think particularly with working with AI, as I was talking about earlier, we need to become comfortable with learning new technologies like prompting and prototyping for us to get to a really good result. So any designer knows wherever they work, they have to get familiar with what they're working on. They really need to put themselves in the user's shoes, and in this case, that's going to require slightly different things when working with AI. And as I mentioned earlier, AI also helps designers get further with code, so it's just going to become, I think, part of our tool set as a designer, whether you're using AI with code or using it to generate illustrations or bounce off ideas or even in Figma. It's just going to become part of our tool set. I think something that we want to keep an eye on, though, and think about is how AI tooling will shape the things that we produce. Wilson Miner did this fantastic talk years ago. I almost use this in every single presentation I do because I loved it so much. But in this talk, he talks about all the screens and things that we design, and that we shape our tools and our tools shape us. And I think that's something that we've really got to keep an eye on and think about as we are designing tools with AI. So for a while before the design engineering popularity sort of took place, a lot of at least people in my sphere would be designers should code. I certainly have done a lot of conference talks saying designers should code. And I think maybe the future now is that designers should prompt. We should be, and I mean to say is we should be using AI in our work to really be effective. So we are going to have to learn and change and use different tools. I think when I started this, I was thinking design engineering is the future of product design, but I actually ended up feeling like it's part of the future, that we'll still need product designers that are very technical and may not be having quite all of the pressure to deliver to implementation, as well as design engineers. I find it hard to imagine that this discipline will do nothing but grow, honestly, with working with AI and with our expectations on experiences. I also think at some point, we'll just stop talking about AI, which maybe some people will be very happy about, and it will just be part of the stack that we work with. Ultimately, I think you still need taste, style, and all the things that influence human creativity. Thank you very much.